Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and speakers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gabriela Inanto, the Associate Officer at the ASEAN Center for Energy, and it is my great pleasure to be here as the Master of Ceremony of this seminar. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the ASEAN-Norway Partnership on Energy and Climate Seminar. Before we begin today's seminar, I would like to kindly remind you to switch your mobile phones to silent mode to avoid interruption. I would also like to remind everyone to keep a safe distance from each other and to keep your mask on at all times. To proceed with the agenda, I would like to invite Dr. Nuki Agia-Utama, the Executive Director of ASEAN Center for Energy, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
Your Excellency Arifin Tasri,
Silakan, Pak.
or his representative, Dr. Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi. Good afternoon. Your Excellency Satvinder Singh, the Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Economic Community, ASEAN Secretariat. Good afternoon. Your Excellency Henrik Tune, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Norway. Good afternoon. Your Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and honorable speakers. The ASEAN Center for Energy, or ACE, is an international government organization representing the interests of 10 countries in Southeast Asia, pertinent on the energy cooperation activities. We established around 2 decades ago, around 20 years from now. And we act as a catalyst to unify and strengthen the energy cooperation in the region as a hub to provide a knowledge repository for policymakers, business makers, academia, industries, and all others. As a think tank, by conducting various studies and providing the analysis about current energy trend, energy issues, energy projection, and as well as the challenges regionally and globally. So on behalf of the ASEAN Center for Energy, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the ASEAN-Norway Partnerships on Climate and Energy Seminar in this very hotel, which co-organized by the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Jakarta, the ASEAN Center for Energy, and the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, RNUPI, and also the Norwegian mission to ASEAN. The partnership between these 3 institutions is the manifesto of our ongoing project. We call it the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project, or ACEP. The support from the government of Norway is one of the ASEAN sectoral dialogue partners through the Norway-ASEAN Regional Integration Program, or we call it NARIP. ACEP project is the first integrated project on energy and climate change that is officially recognized at the ministerial level. And through this project, we collaborated with various stakeholders in the region, improving the coherence between the energy and climate policies, and also contributing the more climate-friendly development in the energy sectors. Since the project was commenced 2018, before the COVID, and will come at the 37th ASEAN Ministers on Energy meeting, or AMEM, on September 4th, 2019. We have contributed to developing a more climate-friendly energy sector in the region. And ASEP endlessly supported the ASEAN member state by conducting relevant studies and events which serve as a platform to share information on the energy climate nexus. And one of the significant contributions of the project is the adoption of the new outcome-based strategies, or OBS. Number 6, which is promote information sharing on the energy climate nexus under the program area number 6, regional energy policy and planning, in the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, or in short we call it APAC Phase 2, 2021-2025. And this was also noted in the joint ministerial statement of the 38th AMEM on November 20, 2020. Up until today, the program has produced 7 academic papers, 26 policy briefs, 26 energy and climate insight, and also 10 reports. And more than 150,000 users have visited this ASEP website. And the publication we have also being downloaded by more than 28,000 times. I think it's one of the biggest numbers in all of these ACE project activities. But not only publication, the project also successfully organized almost 40 virtual public events, sharing insightful knowledge on the energy climate nexus, on the ASEAN member state and beyond. Distinguished participants, while we are proud of this achievement, we realize that there is more homework to do. Especially today, when we are in a critical time, after 2 years of hardship coming from the COVID-19 pandemics. The energy demand in ASEAN is expected to rebound beyond pre-pandemic level as economic activity recovers. Meanwhile, regional and international commitments to tackle climate issues have become more ambitious, precipitated by urgent needs to address climate change. The pandemics and other shocks have further demonstrated the need for resilient energy source, thus reducing fossil fuel dependency. The post-pandemic period in this region present opportunities for governments and stakeholders to align energy and climate policy and accelerate the energy transition in ASEAN more effectively. Therefore, I'm very grateful we are here today to discuss ASEAN's policy development for unified energy cooperation towards a low emission and climate resilient development of the energy sector. And ASEAN countries could effectively implement their NDC's commitment in this context. So I believe that this cooperation, the climate and energy nexus, is something that we have to really looking forward for the future ASEAN region for pursuing more climate friendly energy sectors. Thank you very much for these opportunities, and hope we are going to have a very interesting discussion in today's seminar. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nuki Agya.
Very good afternoon, Your Excellencies. Secretary Trun, good to see you here today the whole day. Thank you for your presence here in Jakarta. We are delighted to have you here join us for the seminar. Pak Yudi, Pak Priyadi, thank you for being with us here today also, and thank you for your insights you shared with us a while ago. Of course, I'd like to acknowledge ambassadors from Norway being here, and of course, all of you distinguished panelists and participants today. Good to have you all here joining us. You know, it's good to be here physically in this room in the event like this. I wish we don't have to wear the mask. Yeah. Maybe I don't have to wear the mask because it's very difficult to speak with the mask. So I ask your permission to remove the mask. First of all, I want to thank the Norwegian Embassy in Jakarta, the ASEAN Center of Energy and the Norwegian Institute for Foreign Policy for bringing all of us together here this afternoon. To me, it's indeed a timely opportunity for us to collaborate to address some of the challenges of sustainable energy transition in the region. And for us, important to discuss this despite all of the geopolitical challenges that we are confronting today globally. And it's important for us to take stock of the contributions that we need to make collectively to the global climate change commitment. Excellencies, for us, the ASEAN region, we all are proudly committed to be part of the global effort to transit towards a low-carbon future, to transit to a sustainable future. In addition to the commitments covered under the Paris Agreement, as you all know, what Park Yuki has mentioned, in fact, some 8 ASEAN member states, as we speak today, have their pledge to reach a net zero emissions at COP26 last year. ASEAN currently is now consolidating our efforts towards a sustainable development through our own plan for circular economy and our strategic plan for carbon neutrality. This is something in the works, and I want you guys to look out for it. This includes adoption of a framework of circular economy for the ASEAN Economic Community, which we started work last year. And right now, we are working on a complete implementation plan for the region, which we want to present to ministers later this year. At the same time, on a parallel basis, there is also effort being tasked by the economic ministers and energy ministers for us to develop a concept note on the ASEAN strategy for carbon neutrality. So this is hardcore work that's been laid on to the Secretariat to deliver this year, and I want you guys to look out for that, and we will want to work with everyone in order to fulfill some of this obligation. The energy sector's role, as you can imagine, your contribution to both of these efforts is going to be front and center. So there's no running away. So the energy sector and all of you in the fraternity are going to play a very significant role in contributing to both the circular economy plan and also the carbon neutral plan for ASEAN. Speaking on behalf of the ASEAN fraternity, we want to just take stock that given this current geopolitical developments, it's just becoming more apparent that it's critical for us to continue to balance our energy transformation efforts. At the same time, we also continue to ensure stability and energy security. At the same time, affordability and inclusivity of energy sources for our people. So the balance is important. I think amidst the climate imperative and the prevailing risks in the global energy markets, I think we want to take stock of all the challenges, but at the same time, we are committed in wanting to work in 3 ways. First, we want to focus on searching for viable and multiple paths, not just single path, multiple paths to secure our growing energy needs. And it's not just renewables. Okay? Second, we are also embracing transition to a sustainable energy future, including accelerating clean energy and energy efficiency infrastructure deployment in the region. At the same time, I discussed this morning also with Minister how we are also wanting to focus on energy transition technologies that will address the decarbonization of fossil fuel sources. Thirdly, basically, we are also embracing an overall global collective of wanting to lower carbon emissions across all sectors and segments in our societies. So therefore, it's very important to highlight that as a region, approaches to energy transition are going to be holistic and are going to be on multiple fronts. And we are striving to balance our people's needs for secure and affordable energy while at the same time contribute to the collective action of lowering carbon emissions. And basically, we want to do this with our eyes open, in a practical way and in a sensible way, at the same time in a scientific manner. Okay? Not to be led by certain agendas out there that sometimes do not give us an accurate picture of what's going on. As explained by ACE Executive Director Dr. Nuki just now, the ASEAN have adopted the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation Phase 2, This was done in 2020, November, and it has a very strong focus on accelerating energy transition and strengthening the energy resilience through greater innovation and cooperation. In fact, their PIKE 2 is in a continuation of the phase 1, and there's going to be a lot more new initiatives to enhance energy transition and resilience. The focus, as you know, has been reinforced by the Bandar Sri Begawan Joint Declaration made by the 39th ASEAN Ministers Meeting on Energy and Energy Security that took place in September last year. And amongst the articles, there was a very strong regional intent to work on an aspirational, for the first time, an aspirational long-term regional target towards lowering emission energy systems, collectively by all the ASEAN ministers. And this is to further cooperate with all other pillars under the ASEAN community. Okay, so this is where we are really looking forward to working with everyone, whether it's going to be our dialogue partners, whether it's going to be our international organizations, as well as external partners. We all are wanting to work together to address the sustainable economic and energy development challenges. For 2022, I'd like to share that under Cambodia's chairmanship, the ASEAN Energy Fraternity has also agreed to deliver annual priorities which are going to contribute towards energy transition. Let me share several of them. First, there is also the fact that we are moving this year to initiate the development of the ASEAN Long-Term Renewable Energy Roadmap. This roadmap will aim to chart the pathway for the development of renewables that will consider new and emerging sustainable systems available to us in a rapidly changing economic and global innovation environment. Second, we are finalizing a study on CCUS deployment framework and the roadmap possibly for ASEAN to initiate some pilot CCUS projects in the region. This is for a practical, credible CCUS deployment strategy and eventually an implementation plan to help ASEAN lower emissions alongside the energy transition efforts. I think this is where I've also made an appeal to the Minister and to your government in Norway that we could do more in this space, which probably previously we haven't explored. Third, I think we are also going to be this year putting emphasis on initiating studies on the status and the potential of energy efficiency and conservation, especially for transport and industry sectors, as well as further the EEEC and power sector operations. This is, of course, to encourage further energy efficiency efforts in both transport, industry, and power sectors in order to meet our ASEAN ramped-up targets for energy intensity reduction. The target is set for 35% by 2025, and I'm glad to say that we are very well poised to achieve those targets. Excellencies, for us in ASEAN, we understand that energy and climate action is a global cross-cutting agenda that extends beyond the energy sector. The transition process requires definitely multi-stakeholder engagement and collaborations, including development partners, especially Norway. We know how good what you have done, and there's a lot for us to benefit from you. In fact, the ASEAN's first energy cooperation project with Norway, through the about-to-be-completed ACCEPT project, it set out to support ASEAN in enhancing our understanding of the energy-climate nexus and contribute to a more climate-friendly development of the energy sector. And this was implemented by ACE and also NUPI, and this project has successfully delivered some beneficial outcomes for policy integration for the region. In closing, I therefore look forward to deepening these outcomes through the proposed phase 2 of the ACCEPT project so that we can deliver more strategic outcomes towards ASEAN's energy transition to a low-carbon energy systems and contributing towards the global carbon neutrality, or what we say the net zero, in the coming years. We hope ACCEPT 2 will also be complemented by, hopefully, first, a specific small-scale energy transformation and decarbonization initiatives that will improve our capabilities and deploy some of these small-scale projects that potentially may have direct impact to small stakeholders, and also will be encouragingly serving as pilots to help us scale some of these projects to the rest of the region. Second, I also wish that as we ACCEPT 2 is developed, there will be more structured approaches to improving the region's access to fossil decarbonization technologies involving collaboration with private sector from all over the world. I'm gladly glad to know that this morning when we were engaging Minister and his team from Norway, there's been a lot of potential areas that we identified that could potentially be part of our bilateral collaboration between Norway and ASEAN. I hope that today's seminar is definitely a start, a platform to continue discussing our innovative ideas and improving our paths forward in our energy transition journey. I wish all of us a wonderful discussion this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Invite Bapak Insinyur Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, expert staff on strategic planning at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources Indonesia, to deliver his speech on behalf of the Minister, His Excellency Arifin Tasrif.
Allow me, please. Uncover my face. Allow me again to speak on behalf of my minister, Mr. Arifin Tasrif. Very sorry he cannot join this very good meeting. Honorables, Mr. Hendrickson, Mr. Samuel Singh, and Ambassador Peterson, Ambassador Giverin, dear speakers and participants, good morning, good afternoon to you all. My sincere gratitude for the cooperation between the ASEAN Center of Energy, Norwegian Institute of Internal Affairs, and Norwegian Embassy in Jakarta for preparing and organizing today's event. The speed of energy transitions differs among one country to another. Some experience energy transition as the stimulation of sustainable economic growth, while others, including Indonesia, need breakthrough in policies, financial support, technology partnership, and measure in addressing socioeconomic impacts to enable faster pace of energy transition. Indonesia has been developing a roadmap towards net zero emission, which includes a scenario of CFPP, coal-fired power plant gradual retirement starting in 2026. There will be no plan to add CFPP, while the last CFPP will be retired in 2056. A greener RUPTL, National Electricity Program, 2021-2030, so this is about a decade period, has also been issued to achieve NDC and NZE target by allocating 51.6% share of renewables to be developed, or equal to 20.9 gigawatts additional capacity. After 2030, electricity supply will only come from new and renewable energy power plants such as solar, followed by wind and ocean energy. Hydrogen and nuclear will be utilized starting from 2031 and 2049. However, fossil fuel will still be used to meet energy demand for a certain period of time, as Indonesia is still progressing toward net zero emission. Hence, several strategies need to be developed to minimize the use of these fossil fuels. Among others are reducing the LPG consumption by providing alternative energy sources such as city gas, managing the subsidized LPG only for the poor and vulnerable, and replacing the price subsidy to direct targeted subsidy. Other programs are to reduce fossil fuel utilization, such as gradual retirement of coal-fired power plants, biomass co-firing for existing coal-fired power plants, and conversion of diesel power plants with a local-based renewable energy, and deployment of low-carbon technology such as CCS and CCUS. A distinguished participant, in regard to regional initiative, ASEAN member countries have shown great movement towards clean energy development and energy transitions. In particular, the continent of Asia will remain as the engine of global economic growth and the center of gravity of global energy demand. This statement marks Asia's commitment to pursue green energy even further to promote economic prosperity and sustainable growth. Some of ASEAN member countries have been on the lead on addressing climate change, as well as challenges need to be overcome collectively. The latest regional blueprint on energy operation, the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, APAEC Phase 2, 2021-25, has clearly addressed the concern on the energy and climate change, particularly in setting the regional aspirational targets for renewable energy and energy efficiency. As one of the ASEAN member states, Indonesia is always on the front line to support the energy transition at the regional level, building the collaboration with all stakeholders to achieve regional energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. In the course of Indonesia's G20 presidency, we aim to strengthen global sustainable energy system and just transitions, while accelerating efforts for achieving sustainable development goals and mitigating the adverse impacts of climate change. The G20 significance for global energy transition towards clean, affordable, and sustainable energy is clear. The members collectively account for 80% of global primary energy consumption. With their accumulated financial and economic potential, G20 of course have the capacity to shape global energy systems. During the first Energy Transitions Working Group held last March in Yogyakarta, G20 members and invited countries unanimously endorsed this year's agenda, namely securing energy accessibility, smart and clean energy technology scaling up, and advancing energy financing. So basically, three keywords: access, technology, and finance will be discussed in Energy Transition Working Group G20 this year. And I'm the chair of the Energy Transition Working Group G20 2022. G20 members commit to reach net zero emission while at the same time increase efforts in realizing 2030's sustainable development goals. To achieve this, technology cooperation and partnership with countries and international organizations are of course essential. The first pillar, securing energy accessibility. G20 members will pursue the progress of accessibility, taking into consideration the principle of leaving no one behind towards affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all, in specific, clean cooking and electrification. In the second pillar, smart and clean energy technology scaling up, G20 members commit to rapidly scaling up widest variety of technologies, while anticipating future energy transition challenges, including people-centered energy transition, growing demand for energy storage, low-emission energy system, clean industrial development, transfer of technology, renewables integration, and energy efficiency. In the third pillar, advancing energy financing, G20 members agree to ensure green financing ecosystem in energy transition through exploring best practices, assessing growing challenges, and mitigating financing disparity. The expected lighthouse deliverable of Indonesia presidency in achieving global deal to accelerate energy transition. In this respect, it is hoped that G20 members will express bold commitment to achieve global target on energy access, escalate viable clean technologies, and intensify energy transition financing. That will be declared in a concrete ministerial communique. Furthermore, G20 members are strengthening the importance of security and resilience of the energy supply chain. Besides the challenges of global economic market uncertainty, it is very important for the G20 to work together to restore more stable market conditions and modernize energy market governance to ensure energy security and the energy transition process. We certainly expect that the Sustainable Energy Action Plans and deliverables developed under the G20 presidency can be further emphasized and followed up in various regional forums, particularly ASEAN, especially on the occasion of Indonesia holding the ASEAN chairmanships next year. The government of Norway has been one of the ASEAN supportive partners to, among others, the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project, ACCEPT, which is jointly implemented by the ASEAN Center for Energy and the Norwegian Institute for Foreign Policy. It aims to improve the coherence between the ASEAN energy and climate policies and contribute to more climate-friendly development on the energy sector. Through the partnership of ASEAN-Norway, hopefully Norway can support and contribute to ASEAN aspirational target to increase the component of the energy to 23% in total primary energy mix and 32% energy intensity cutting by 2025. and furthermore, to support Indonesia in achieving its net zero target that will also be remarkably beneficial for the region. In order to scale up the existing collaboration, the possible areas of cooperation that might be explored and sharing of clean energy technology to replace coal-based technology, investment promotion in clean energy, and addressing the socio-economic impacts of the global energy transition. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, as ASEAN and Indonesia are working towards sustainable energy transition, it is our hope that the government of Norway can continue and strengthen the existing collaboration. Our common endeavor in achieving sustainable energy transition should always be on fire, as there will be challenges ahead of us. By the spirit of no one left behind, let us work hand in hand to achieve the target of energy transition. Thank you, and may we all have a good day.
Thank you very much, Bapak Insinyur Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi. Last but definitely not least, I would like to invite His Excellency Henrik Tuna, Deputy Foreign Minister of Norway, to deliver his speech.
Your Excellency Singh, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN Economic Community, Priyadi, Minister of Education, distinguished ambassadors, panelists, and participants. Let me start by thanking ASEAN Center for Energy and the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs and the Norwegian Embassy here in Jakarta for jointly putting together this important seminar. The theme, addressing challenges together for a sustainable energy transition, is timely, considering current developments in the energy sector globally and the need for increased ambitions to achieve climate goals. I'm therefore truly looking forward to our discussions today on how we can strengthen cooperation to ensure a more sustainable and resilient energy transition. Dear friends, we have seen the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of an energy system heavily reliant on the fuels of the 20th century. The current crisis in Ukraine, of course, brings a new concern and uncertainty to countries all around the world. Energy that is unreliable causes uncertainty. Energy that is too costly alienates and isolates. Energy that pollutes is negative for the environment and sustainable development. As the energy demands is expected to increase both in ASEAN countries and in Norway, poor energy choices means slower economic growth and damage to the ecosystem that sustain us all. A green transition is imperative. An assertive shift in ASEAN countries has potential, I believe, to bring significant contributions to a climate-friendly and more resilient energy sector, both regionally, here in Asia, and globally. This is a shared responsibility. We must all play our part and be mindful of challenges specific to each country. Yet, we must increase our efforts to transform the way we produce and use energy. We must also transform the policies that guide our social and economic behavior and how we treat our common environment. The objectives of the green transition are shared across the world. But we must remember that different countries have different points of departure in terms of energy mix, skills, and also resources. There is no one-size-fits-all. However, I believe there is an opportunity to elevate the overall readiness for more renewable energy sources that brings affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy to the people. It is important that we ensure a just and inclusive energy transition. A transition that is climate friendly, but at the same time creates new jobs, ensure equity, and that balances the burden on those harmed by the changes. And I can assure you all that Norway will do its share in the coming years. We will reduce our emissions by 50 to 55% by the year 2030, and further reduce emissions by 90 to 95% by 2050. Norway will also double its climate finance to 14 billion Norwegian kroner by 2026. As part of this, we will, at a minimum, triple our adaptation financing. We will work with our partners to help finance the transition to renewable energy, and we will support investments that can help to phase out coal. We have also launched a new climate investment fund to fund renewable energy in partner countries. To reach our common goals in the Paris Agreement, we need the private sector on board. The path to carbon neutrality offers opportunities for innovation, growth, and sustainable jobs. Norwegian companies have been at the forefront of exploring and developing clean technologies at an early stage in electric mobility, carbon capture and storage, green shipping, hydrogen, offshore wind, and batteries. The pioneering spirit is now paying off, and there are certainly further gains through joint efforts and competence sharing with interest partners as ASEAN and as Indonesia, and we're looking forward to that. We see commitments in ASEAN. Several ASEAN countries have set clear targets for themselves, including net zero ambitions. The participation of some ASEAN countries in the ongoing process to establish Just Energy Partnership is highly welcome and also important, we strongly believe. And we hope to see strong engagement from more ASEAN countries in the time ahead. Indonesia's G20 presidency is a great opportunity to materialize shared energy and climate targets. And we believe the G20 countries should take the lead to ensure a successful transition. In Norway, we stand ready to support Indonesia's leadership and its energy and climate priorities where and when it's needed. Friends, before I end my remarks, I want to direct our attention to the institutions that have gathered us today. ASEAN Center for Energy and the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs has, as many of you know, since 2018 collaborated on the project ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project, also known as the ACCEPT project. The successful project has produced a critical evidence base to inform and strengthen coherence between energy and climate policy in ASEAN and the ASEAN member states. The ACCEPT project, due to its deliveries and strategic importance, is a flagship project, I believe, in Norway's dialogue with ASEAN and also the future partnership. Last year, Norway and ASEAN adopted a second 5-year partnership cooperation agreement to strengthen cooperation on issues of mutual interest. The success of the ACCEPT project have set the precedents for closer, more constructive and more meaningful cooperation also under the new agreement. I'm glad that Norway is involved in a project that brings concrete and added values to ASEAN and the ASEAN member states. Therefore, I'm also delighted to announce that Norway intends to renew its commitments to the ACCEPT project for a second project period. And I entrust both ACE, NUPI, and the Norwegian Embassy here in Jakarta to continue the good cooperation already established between the three entities. And in closing, I would like to encourage all participants to bring their best knowledge to this important discussion for the rest of the time and the rest of the day we have together here today. Thank you very much for your attention, all of you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Henrik Tuna. Once again, I would like to convey our highest gratitude to all keynote speakers. We appreciate you taking your time off your busy schedules to join us today. Now we will proceed with the panel discussion. I would like to invite the moderator and all panelists to take the stage.
Okay, again, good afternoon, dear honorables, ladies and gentlemen, dear panelists. Welcome to the second session of the seminar. We have invited distinguished experts and panelists to discuss with an exploratory spirit the state of the energy transition in Southeast Asia and how the joint efforts can help improve ASEAN's readiness to a green energy transition. So, with us today, we have panel Marie Il de Sagon, the Assistant Director and Head of Energy and Mineral Division at the ASEAN Secretariat. Good afternoon. Dr. Ida Citra Yusgiantoro, the Chairperson at the Purnomo Yusgiantoro Center. Good afternoon. Hans Olaf Ibrecht, Special Envoy for Climate and Security at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Good afternoon. Dr. Insinyur Yudo Dwi Nanda Priyadi, the expert staff on strategic planning at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources of Indonesia. And also, last but not least, Dr. Kamia Handayani, the Vice President for Climate Change and Environmental Safeguard, PLN, state-owned company from Indonesia. Big applause for the panelists.
ASEAN Center for Energy.
So, before further ado, just want to start the discussion. The first question for all the panelists to answer, and all of you will be given 2 minutes to provide your reflection briefly and concretely. So, from your point of view, your perspective, what measures and policy developments are most critical to achieve energy transition in Southeast Asia? So, we may start from Mari,
Yes.
and then in order, Dr. Kamia and so on.
Thank you, Panuki. Good afternoon to everyone. So, for us at the ASEAN Secretariat, one of the things that we think we should be focusing on is apart from what has been, of course, highlighted by our keynote speakers this afternoon, as Payudi had highlighted, for example, technology, finance, and accessibility. One of the things that has to be focused upon by us at this point, due to the prevailing developments, is one is to acknowledge the risks that are there and the challenges that we are facing in the transition period. The transition period in this part of the world, we all know, is going to be a little bit longer because we started in a quite different, as the minister, foreign minister from Norway has has highlighted, we have different starting points. So we need to be able to see those risks, acknowledge those risks, and then proceed to identify how we're going to go about addressing them. I think that's one part that needs to be looked into at this point in time, Panuki. And another, of course, is a very specific way, as my DSG had mentioned, a very specific plan as to how we will be able to access decarbonization for fossil fuels. This is something that is, once again, I'm highlighting because this is something that's unique to our region. So that's all from me for now.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Kami.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for having me here, Dr. Nuki, for your invitation. It is an honor to be here. Good afternoon, distinguished participants. To answer your questions, I would like to highlight a few recommendations from our latest publication. So actually, it's a paper that written under the cooperations between NUPI and Asian Center for Energy, which is looking at ASEAN power sector, how ASEAN power sector could reach net zero by 2050. So based on this research, there are several recommendations that we could highlight in this opportunity. First of all, ASEAN countries has abundant renewable energy resources. So what Asian countries need to do at this point is to capitalize its renewable energy resources, and it has to be carried out right away. So starting from now, because now ASEAN power sector is still heavily relies on fossil fuel. Some of 78% of electricity generation of ASEAN coming from fossil fuels, mainly from coal, 44%. So the second recommendation would be to stop developing new coal power plants. Pak Yudi has mentioned that in Indonesia will stop construction of coal in 2026, and will also gradually phase down coal. And coal phase down is actually one of the outcomes of COP26. Countries have agreed to do coal phase down of unabated coal. So, and then another policy direction is to deploy or to take action to deploy energy storage, because most of the renewable energy sources would be coming from solar and wind, which have intermittent characteristics. So it will need energy storage. So it is important for ASEAN countries to start to lead in this technology, and in this case, technology transfer from industry leader of this technology would be needed. Yeah. And another important policy direction is actually which ASEAN now is doing is on developing the Asian power grid. So interconnections of ASEAN is actually could support decarbonization of ASEAN itself. For example, country like Singapore, who does not have abundant renewable energy resources like other countries in ASEAN, could receive support from these interconnections to decarbonize its power sector, and also it would reduce the need to install large scale of energy storage, because country can exchange powers more flexible. So that would be the highlight from our paper regarding your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Guido.
Thank you, Pak Luki. Speaking about regulation, I think first thing first, we are in the beginning of years of implementation. So I think many countries have already net zero emission target, Paris Agreement commitment. So this is the period, again, the beginning of implementation. Speaking about implementation, we do need real projects everywhere globally, including in Southeast Asia. Without new projects, without real projects on the ground, we cannot achieve our target. will be not as beautiful as we think. So speaking about new projects, it means also investment. Can be new power plant, renewables, can be transmission, and there's a very crucial for Indonesia again because we are strategic in nature, right? And okay. And so Pak Nuki, answering your question. That's why G20 bring finance in our discussion on the table. So not only about talking about project policies, but let's us think about finance because this is a very close aspect that we've never been discussed seriously before. And then, but money will come alone. It will come with a certain condition. Should be, there's a very good roadmap, very good plan, and then a good public policy. Many things. This is the what you call it, the set that we have to working on. Yeah, and then I think this is the support we also need from from Norway to support to this enabling conducive environment to grow, nurturing, and retention. That's my.
Thank you for the questions from Pak Nuki. I would like to also highlight, add all the answers from the panels here, that most of the approach is from top to bottom approach to implement the policy that has been given by the government. But from our research as well, that there are several examples from around the world as well that the bottom to top approach is also effective on the implementation. So meaning that the policy developments should also include how the bottom to top approach is done. What is the bottom to top approach? Meaning that, for example, like the local NGOs that has been working towards the local communities, and then they succeed in, just by grabbing the heart of the local communities. That's really difficult, especially for Indonesia. They have successfully utilized the local resources and also win the heart of the local communities. And this will bring an eye-opener to the government itself. So meaning that the bottom to top approach is effective, is the same effective as the top to bottom approach, which maybe the policy development should be emphasized in this as well. And the second part is that I also agree that each country has its own uniqueness. So meaning that maybe analysis of the SWOT, the strength, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats of each country should be really, really considered. Because we cannot differ in one country, Indonesia, to other countries to implement the same policy. But we can learn from each other. So the analysis of SWOT is very important in this way. That is my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being invited to this seminar. For some good news, today it was reported that there's a record renewable energy deployments or new additions in 2021, 295 gigawatts. I think the bad news is that it's actually going down in the ASEAN region. It was down 40% from 2020 to 2021, and IEA forecasts that it will be also lower in 2022 and 2023. And this is linked to the availability of solar PV modules, among others. So we have the work cut out for ourselves based on the IEA report, if you're going to trust that one. But I think the overall challenge for us is to decouple economic growth and emissions, and further investments in renewable energy is the answer to that. And the energy transition, which many of you have spoken about, needs to be fast-tracked. But of course, the speed will vary because the point of departure also varies. And I think this is a a message that's coming through here from many of the speakers, that we are at different points of departure and that context, as always, matters. So I would welcome ASEAN countries' long-term commitments, but now it's all about implementation. And of course, in implementation, we need to address a host of issues, from getting the investment framework right to the question of whether you have the required technical expertise available for this transition. I think that's a point that we have been quite often missing. But let me focus on three key issues in implementation. We need to ensure reflective energy tariffs in terms of pricing, because this will reduce off-taker risk for investors and then unleash investments. And linked to this, of course, is to create a level playing field between fossil fuels and renewable energy. Secondly, we need to ensure coherence between energy and climate policies. We need to ensure that the NDCs and the long-term strategies are in sync with national energy plans, because in some cases they are not in sync, in fact. And I think that building on current developments and the Ukraine war, of course, energy security will be a key point of departure in terms of aligning or ensuring that there is coherence between energy and climate plans and policies. And thirdly, which is also has come through in our discussion so far, is that when we're developing national plans, we need to look at different pathways and scenarios, and there are several ways to the target. We need to recognize this. We have the global pathways, IA and ARENA. We have the regional one prepared by ASEAN, and then we have national ones, which should be context-specific and reflect national circumstances. But in addition, we need to downscale this to the subnational level, because the impacts on the local communities will actually matter at the end of the day, and there will be winners and losers in this transition that we need to take into account. And finally, I think it's so easy for us to focus on 2050, 60 or 70. I very much doubt that I will be around in 2050, but I'm hoping that I will be around in 2030. So I would encourage all of us to focus on what we will achieve by 2030, because that's the critical one. If we miss the 2030 target, then it will be extremely difficult to achieve our longer-term targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Yes, indeed, try to keep the 2050 still alive, for sure. Yeah, we do have a very common understanding over here that different starting point, each country have a different starting point, different natural resources, especially in the renewable energy resources. And the financial issues matters, yeah. And then also the project implementation should be done as soon as possible, rather than just only talking and only planning, yeah. And then of course the energy security, policy top-down approach, starting also looking at the bottom to top as well. And of course, what you mentioned on the energy storage, we discussed this morning with 10 member states also on the workshop on energy storage, and to capitalize the energy resources in Southeast Asia, and also ASEAN power grid to stabilize the transmission. I think that's all very important. Thank you. And another question addressing to Dr. Kamia and Dr. Hilda. What aspects are critically addressed, and how can ASEAN, the member states and partners, direct partners, countries, and so on, jointly elevate efforts to develop a climate-resilient energy sector that meet the growing energy demand in the region? We all know that in 2040, this region will be the fourth largest energy demand in globally. So there's a very big challenge in the near future, 20 years is not too long. Dr. Kamia, and then Dr. Vida.
Thank you. Indeed, I really like the word climate resilience, yeah, because when we talk about energy sector, usually people look at energy sector as the sector that you have to mitigate climate change, or you have to reduce climate change. But actually, the power sector itself is vulnerable to the impact of climate change. So it's also impacted by climate change. So the reducing emissions in the energy sector is not only because imposed by Paris Agreement, for example, or because ASEAN has international commitment, but it also needs to be driven by the need to do it because ASEAN is actually one of the regions that is most vulnerable to climate change. We have seen severe weather events that have caused electricity infrastructure to be devastated because of it. Blackouts because of the extreme event weathers or the reduce in hydroelectricity power generations because of lack of water. So this means that accelerations of reducing emissions in the energy sector is a necessity because not only because of the international commitment itself, but also because we need to do it to secure the power sector itself from climate risks.
Yes. If we talk about climate, we need to understand about the people in Asia as well. Based on the theory of Maslow hierarchy, that actually most of the Asian people in Asia they only think about fulfilling their basic needs first. Meaning that if we want to answer the question about which aspect, we see the energy security aspect, which is availability, affordability, acceptability, and accessibility. The most important aspect in Asia or maybe in Indonesia should be the affordability. If they can afford energy in the price that they can get, they will think more about the climate. So again, winning the heart of the people in Asia first, affordability is the important aspect compared to the other three aspects to achieve the target for the climate nexus between energy and climate. So that's my answer for the question.
Oh, thank you very much. So, necessity, it is related with energy security because we are running out of fossil fuel. Definitely, we have to go the transition. And also the affordability. It is important for the people in Southeast Asia, not only on these other perspectives, but affordability one of the important matters. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Following the question addressed by Dr. Kamya and also Dr. Filda, I would like to ask Mary, Dr. Yuga, and also Hans, on what are the most significant challenges for decarbonization in ASEAN? Mary, or Dr. Yuga, go ahead. Oh, Mary, okay.
I suppose, thank you for that question, Panuki. I suppose I'll go back to highlighting or rather emphasizing my point earlier that one of the things that we really need to do, at least in this region, or to give attention to, is to see how we can balance energy security, the concern of energy security, and our goal of sustainable energy transition. Because for us, it is a question also of timing. And in between the period where we actually have transformed and that 20 to 30 years of transition, I think we really have to address how concretely we're going to go about this. And given that we are still going to be, so far, at this point, we see ourselves as slowly going down in terms of the share of fossil fuels. We'll still depend on fossil fuels. And one of the things that we need to be doing in between, because we know we're going to be using it, is to really step heavily on how we're going to decarbonize those fossil fuels and perhaps see how we're going to be able to work out those the specific projects and the policy environment that allows it. And I think that's one of the things that we haven't really been focusing on. Of course, we want to deploy renewable energies and energy efficiencies at the same time, but we also have to work out very concrete, structured ways of how we're going to do this, Panuki. Because in my view, in the meantime, we're still if this is going to happen and we don't address it, we're still going to emit. So yes, so very, very realistic, very practical questions in the meantime.
Speaking about, the most crucial aspect for the Commission in ASEAN, I would say that we will do it, of course, this is our plan, but we'll do it in such a way that, taking into account energy security, affordability, and of course, providing access. And then for countries like Indonesia, Philippines, access is very crucial, right? Where we are archipelagic, and then a lot of people everywhere in our region, in our country, and so and finding a right balance, a right mix, taking into account respective demand, respective character, that's something that we have to find by ourselves actually. So, with the help, for it, Norway, but we have to find, but we have to find our own mix, Again, for Indonesia, for instance, we have everybody knows that we are depending heavily on coal. We are the largest exporter of coal, but we want to, again, we have a clear target as well to phase down coal, but we have to do it, just transition, coal value chain business is very, very deeply rooted in some areas in Indonesia, So we have to think about this, So it goes beyond from the energy sector, entering, taking into account the socio-economic impact, Yeah, that's I think something crucial for us to find our own style, of policy. Yeah.
Thank you. First, we are focusing on what we need to phase down or phase out. Maybe we need to focus more on what we need to phase in rather than phasing out, because automatically if you phase in the good stuff, then the bad stuff will be phased out. And we have the roadmap already through the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. So of course, fulfilling the SDG 7 agenda in terms of ensuring full access to energy, especially clean cooking. Of course, ASEAN countries are doing quite well when it comes to access to electricity, but you still have a challenge to address the issue of clean cooking, and that is something that needs to be put higher on the agenda. So like I said, we have the targets and we have the roadmaps, we have national plans. Now it's all about implementation that my colleague from the Ministry of Energy focused in his initial remarks on. And of course, this will also require that we have the necessary finance. We need to unleash investments, and I made some comments to that in my first intervention. I think also underpinning all our work is, of course, that we need sound analysis and good research to base our decisions on. And that's where the ACCEPT project actually fits into the equation. And of course, these days, the issue of energy security and the balance between climate politics and energy security needs to be factored into what we are doing. I think it's quite clear that we have the technologies available, at least in terms of what we need to do by 2030. Beyond 2030, we still need technological development. So the technologies are there. Now we need political leadership and the resources required in order to meet the targets that we have set. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's very perfect answer from the panelists, that the technology is very important. Beyond 2030, we still need technology advancement. And also the balance between the energy security and also on the, especially on the transition era. And of course, the conflict structure needed to be really addressed by the member states, right? As you stated also. And optimum energy mix, yeah, I think it's also very important. And power sector is very vulnerable in this case. Yeah, so we need to have to, starting from the security perspective first, because whatever it is, we are going to be the net importers of fossil fuel. And the people as the basic needs, affordability is also one of the major obstacle, I think, that we going ahead on the transition issue. Okay, thank you very much. And then there will be a chance for audience to ask 3 questions to the panelists. You can address to which panelist that you want to ask, or you can ask all of them. One here, one there, and then one lady on the back. Please, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if you have time, then you can state your name and where you're coming from. Yeah, and then the second also state your name and your institution or your country.
A quick question. Thank you very much. Very good afternoon, ladies and my name is Nugro Adi Sasongko. I'm the director or head of the research center at the Research Organization of Energy and Manufacture of the National Research and Innovation Agency, or BRIN. Thank you very much. I'm here. It's like coming back to my second home. I was graduate from Norway and I lived there for 4 years. And it was from 2006 until 2010. It was 11 years back. So I'm happy to be here. And I'm not asking the question. I just want to point out another 2 points that is very important to be discussed on this session. First is capacity building. And then the second is technology transfer. I know Norway is very heavily expert on the renewable, especially hydro and wind power. And also recently they also developed on the hydrogen technology and some solar PV voltaic technology. When I was in 2007, I drove my first hydrogen car, start from Oslo to Stavanger, and I'm very happy at that time. I worked for the Statoil Hydro and Aker Clean Carbon to run the first project for Norway for Sleipner's field for the carbon capture and sequestration utilized for the amine contactor. I think it's please also address to another option that is very important is capacity building and then the technology transfer. Oh, I forgot to mention, I also lecturer for Indonesia Defense University as a lecturer for energy security. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Santo. Perhaps this question is just to add.
Thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed your stay in Norway. On the issue of capacity building, I sort of alluded a little bit to it in my first remarks. But I think this is an overlooked problem because I'm asking the question, how many engineers and technicians will we need in 2030 or 2050 to do the job? Some years ago when I was doing water supply and sanitation, I met a colleague in Kenya, and he had developed a spreadsheet estimating how many engineers and technicians he would need in 2030 in order to achieve the water and sanitation targets. And then you could, and the dropouts rates, etc., etc. And then he had modeled how many kids we had to put in school today in order to reach the 2030 target. And it turned out, in the case of Kenya at least, it was impossible. So I think we need to, like I'm struggling with my own daughter, how to get her involved in this business, and I want to follow in my footsteps. She's now studying chemistry, so she's close. But I think that's what we need to do. We need to focus on education, especially of girls, and ensure that we have enough technicians, because this will be a critical component in terms of moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. The next gentleman question, Dr. Please state your name and your
My name is Adi from OECD. I'm also serving as Executive Board in Indonesian Institute for Energy Economics. My question is for Pak Yudo, Pak. In your remarks, you highlighted about every country have different speed in the energy transition. And I think all of this, the panelists also say about that. As a chairman of Energy Transition Working Group, maybe you can share how to handle it. Because each different country have different or a different view, something like that, including your important point of the financing. Every country have different need. And also maybe as mentioned by Mbak Vilda, every country have different, what is called different priority. For example, maybe in Indonesia, affordability is the priority. What is your experience and how to handle it? Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Pak Batehin. In G20, if we talk about energy transitions, always with S, transitions. We have a long debate about this, This is that we acknowledge, the difference among countries, That's why we put transitions. Every single country have their own trajectory of energy transition. So you said about different starting point, something like that, But different path as well. Yeah, based on, we call it based on our respective national context. Then like skill set of people, natural resource, something like that, Pak Bateh is G20 energy group is quote unquote notoriously well known about a very hot debate, Again, I share this fact with many people, Last year in Rome, we had the last discussion of working group, starting from 3 p.m. Jakarta time, ended 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. So that's the debate, Pak. So it's very, your question is pointing at that direction, So we agree anything that we can agree. Why? Because when our respective flag, right, before our eyes, our face, and we speak on behalf of our country. And it can be very, very different, Pak. Very different perspective, But again, I was, fighting so hard, to focus on the discussion of access, technology, and finance. So far, very good, Pak. So very good. Thanks, thanks, Lord. It's very, very good. Otherwise, we have very previous in the previous, very discussion, very, very broad, Pak, without focusing on it. But this is, I do hope that this is the first time G20 focusing on priorities, Rather than, every countries can talk, can express their, saying their statement, anything they want based on their character, this economic context, So, Pak, I have a lot of discussion. I spent, I don't know, under hour, Pak, video conferencing with many members of G20, and then, lobbying them one by one, actually. And then asking at this starting point, maybe we can agree. So at this point, maybe we cannot, but at this point, maybe we can agree, Pak. And then finance. So finance, everybody is agree, Pak. That's very, very lucky, But next game is bringing the disparity between, the developed and developing countries. And, goes back to the taking the legacy of COP26, reaffirming $100 billion. That's written in the Glasgow, right? So finger crossed.
Thank you. A very good afternoon. My name is Adityani Putri. I lead a nonprofit that is a strategic communications hub that helps to works with civil society and think tanks to advance the climate action and energy transition agenda in Indonesia. And my question is about finance. I think following up from what Mas Bahtih has said, my question is addressed to Pak Yudo, but I would like to also hear the views of all of the other panelists as well regarding the question of finance, specifically coal transition finance. There are key G20 countries and also key countries within the ASEAN region that would require a substantial amount of finance to conduct the coal phase out. Indonesia is one of them, Vietnam is another, that's not a G20 country but an ASEAN country, and then India, for instance, would also require. And I would like to know, Pak Yudo, if there is indeed a discussion underway at the moment to put together a South Africa-style coal transition deal for these countries, and specifically for Indonesia? And what would be the key needs? What would be the amount that Indonesia, for example, is aiming for? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. And also I would like to ask about the role of carbon finance. Is that discussed at all? Is that considered in the G20 discussions at all? And also within the region, maybe this is for Pak Nuki and Ibu Mari to answer. Are we looking, is ASEAN looking to set up a carbon community into the future? Is that also something that is being underway at the moment? Thank you.
Bu, Alok Sharma came twice to Indonesia. So yes, we have been discussing how to accelerate, the president said that we will reach net zero emission 2060 or sooner. If we do it alone, 2060. If we have strong support, stronger and stronger, it's faster and faster, Again, not because we want it, because again, this is the global commitment at least in Glasgow. I think it will be repeated, looking at the trend, Egypt, COP, but again, the discussion still in the very, very preliminary stage, still, exchanging views, something like that, because we honor the contract of power purchase agreement, right? We somehow make it faster or early retirement. There is a financial consequences, right? So this kind of story, is one by one, like peeling, layer, one layer by one layer, So again, this is still we know we are doing that process, but still a very, very preliminary stage. But I would say that the world is watching the experience in South Africa, whether this commitment can be realized, becoming a reality, or still debating after Glasgow, debating 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, we don't know. But everybody watching the real implementation of the South Africa. It is when good, real commitment, real money flows, real projects in place. I would say, it's like a snowballing, everywhere globally, But again, South Africa is the first everybody watching that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Hans.
Could I try to briefly address this issue also? Because at COP26, the GFANS Alliance, the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero, was announced, and it was 130 trillions of assets under management. And according to the alliance, this is ready to be deployed for net zero investments. Of course, that's a heck of a lot of money, to use that expression. And this brings me to the point of the Article 2.1c in the Paris Agreement, which deals about greening of financial flows. Because we focus on the 100 billion, but of course the 100 billion will not get us very far. That's what we committed to provide by 2020. And we from Norway, like the State Secretary said, we will double finance, so over climate finance, so we will definitely contribute to try to achieve that target. But globally, we need 3 to 5 trillions annually to invest in the energy transition, and 70–80% of this needs to come from private sector. So we need to use the scarce public resources in such a manner that it unleashes or leverages private sector investments. Carbon finance Article 6 negotiations have been concluded, so of course that would offer possibilities. But I would like to address one issue, and that's the key issue of also domestic resource mobilization. I think you have actually plans to introduce CO2 tax. We have had a CO2 tax in Norway since 1991. The government has an ambition to triple the CO2 tax by 2030. And we also need to look into the whole issue of taxation. And if I can say, one of my previous ministers, he actually said, come to Norway because we are world champions in taxation. So we have experiences to offer to you in terms of set up a tax system that actually will provide domestic resources, which will be needed for this transition. Thank you.
Just to add to that, Panuki, in the ASEAN side, the work has been on many fronts, and one is, as you know, as you all probably know, the first version of the ASEAN sustainable taxonomy is out, and it's under development and actually being consulted with sectors at the moment. And that's one effort where ASEAN is trying to make sure that we have one sort of reference document that would allow us to sort of have some coherence on attracting finance for sustainable energy, including the transition period. That's one effort. The other thing is in terms of projects, project level effort, and funds that would support this. We also have the work of ASEAN with ADB using with ADB, but also that fund is also in co-partnership with other development partners. But it is managed by ADB. It's called the ASEAN Green Catalytic Fund, an offshoot of the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund. And within that, there's ongoing piloting, of course, by ADB in Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And I think much later they will consider Malaysia, because those are the 4 countries that have the highest coal power plant share in terms of in electricity share coming from coal. So that's what they call the clean development mechanism, where the entire idea is to try to see whether we can this mechanism can help accelerate the retirement of these coal power plants, but at the same time respecting the power purchase agreements that are there. And these are some of the examples that are being looked at, and hopefully more and more initiatives such as this can be scaled up later. But these are all the little sort of, not little, but the contributions from all partners that we can then go ahead and develop further, so that we would have a mix of solutions that we can actually deploy going forward.
Thank you very much. You want to add?
I'd like to add on the carbon finance side, or carbon trading. So as Ibu Mari mentions about the piloting of energy transition mechanism for the early retirement of coal, in the case of Indonesia, there are currently ADB and PLN, Ministry of Finance, and also Ministry of Energy working on feasibility study of retiring some pilot power plants, and we hope that in G20 event we can launch this pilot project, the mechanism. So one of the issues that still under discussions and has not been addressed is on the carbon reductions from this early retirement, because when we retire coal before the lifetime, so it means that we avoid certain amount of emissions, right? So if we want to connect it with the Article 6, for example, it has not clear yet whether the emission reduction from coal retirement can be eligible to be transferred or like sell to another countries as ITMO or international transfer mitigation outcomes. So is it eligible for that or not? So it's still under discussions. How can we like monetize the carbon emissions that will be achieved from this pilot project of early coal retirement? Yeah, so we don't know yet.
Thank you very much. I think it's perfect discussion we had. The same with our condition right now, that we don't have any luxury of time. In the next 20, 30 years, we also do not have a luxury of fossil fuel. So, like it or not, we have to do a transition, and we have to start it right now. Again, thank you very much for the panelists. Before I give hand to Dr. Indra, as also stated with from Your Excellency Tune, that there is no one size fits all. There is no silver bullets to solve these issues of energy transition. That's why plenty of things that we need to discuss and plenty of things that we need to utilize. A big applause once again for the panelists for this great moment. I would like to invite Dr. Indra Overland, research professor and head of the research group on climate and energy from Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, or NUPRI. Please, thank you very much once again for the panelists. Yeah.
Ini apa lambat apa extend ya waktunya.
I guess I should use the handheld microphone, right?
Pakai masker nggak
Yep.
kelihatan.
Okay. So, thank you very much for this very interesting task to summarize everything that has been said. And I hope you understand this is it's difficult to do it entirely objectively. So I'm going to be a little bit subjective, probably, inevitably. And I thought I would start by going back, not to what was said at the beginning of today, but things that have been said in the preparation for this event. So also taking in that a little bit, with just one small observation of a difference between ASEAN and maybe much of the world, and a Norwegian and a European perspective, in that I think in ASEAN there's quite a lot of focus on the moving out of the pandemic and into a post-pandemic situation, and the implications for the energy sector, for demand, pricing, and so on, and for climate policy. Whereas in Europe, the focus now, I think, is shifting, or has shifted very much on to the conflict in Ukraine and the divide between Russia and the West, and Russia being clearly the world's biggest energy exporter, and that this divide has quite big implications for global energy and climate issues. And while on this topic, I think also, this is coming from me, but a little special thank you to Singapore, which is a country which has been very clear in its support for Ukraine and for international law and human rights and so on in this context. Right, so on to today's event, or today's discussion. I'll also include a little bit from the keynote speeches, which I thought provided a really good cross-section of the current situation, the kind of ongoing discussion and thinking, and how things look when you look forward a little bit. And it's really interesting to see how much this cross-section now is different from what we would have had 3, 4, 5 years ago when we were preparing and starting the ACCEPT project. Clearly, there's been a big development in the individual ASEAN member states and in ASEAN as a regional organization in terms of commitments, or in terms of discussion about and policy documents on energy transition and on the nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. And as we also heard, there is more coming up this year. ASEAN Renewable Energy Roadmap, much more work on carbon capture and use, and an emphasis on energy efficiency. There is also, I think, rightly, a focus on the challenges of balancing satisfying growing energy needs as ASEAN successfully develops its economy and moves people out of poverty. So this on the one hand, and on the other side, clean energy. And this is often summarized in the accessibility, affordability, reliability, and sustainability aspects of energy. And we also heard several remarks about the importance of not only of renewable energy, but also of decarbonizing fossil fuels, which will still be used for some time, both in ASEAN and in the world. And we also heard some specific requests for a continuation of the ACCEPT project, for some concrete small-scale decarbonization pilots, and for more structured approaches to decarbonization, including closer cooperation with the private sector, which I think is something that there hasn't been so much of yet in this cooperation. Also, very important emphasized was, or a very interesting mention here from the Indonesian side is the evolving approach to energy subsidies and maybe increasing attempt to target energy subsidies at the poor, which I think would be a very positive development. Energy subsidies are very problematic in principle and in general, but as we've seen in many parts of the world, including in Norway and in many other European countries, and for a long time in Indonesia and other ASEAN countries, it is very important to take into account the poor and how changing energy prices affect the poor in an uneven way. So I think this is one of the most important areas to work in for anybody working on government energy policy nowadays. It was also noted that, and emphasized, I think, by several speakers, that different countries have different starting points for energy transition, and one size does not fit all. It was also mentioned from the Norwegian side that Norway is greatly increasing its climate financing and getting more and more involved in this area, but also bringing money to the table. And from the Indonesian side, also mentioned the pledges of 100 billion per year of dollars for climate financing, which so far has not been realized. And of course, this is one of the major challenges of international climate policy and energy transition. I would just add that it's also, I think it's very important to keep the pressure on this, but it's also maybe useful not only to think of climate policy and energy transition as a burden, which we need to find an equitable way to share, which obviously it is, but also to think of it as an opportunity and as a business opportunity. And that those countries which manage to take up leading positions in some of the very many different niches, technological, policy-wise niches, but business niches that exist, those countries that manage to take up leading positions early may benefit a lot from this in the future. So partly there's a burden that needs to be shared, and Norway and other countries need to make a contribution, but there is also opportunities to be seized here for those who see them. So moving to the panel discussion, first some general points. As I mentioned at the beginning, when I first started talking, there has been a big shift in the debate in Indonesia and in the ASEAN countries. At the same time, there is now a need, not just in ASEAN, but also all over the world, to move from doing the talk to doing the walk. So to move to actual implementation, and this was noted quite early on in the panel discussion. And at the same time, we're coming through a very challenging pandemic situation, which has been very hard in several ASEAN countries. And in 2021, investments in renewable energy in ASEAN fell by 40%, I think was the number that was mentioned. And there's also forecast for fall in 2022. So there was maybe not quite enough investment going on before the pandemic, and then it has fallen increasingly. So there's really an urgent need to ramp up investment. And it's important to focus it's important to have the long-term targets for 2050 or 2060, but what is really important here now is the targets and the implementation until 2030, which is a part of what you do before you get to 2050 or 2060. And it was mentioned from the Indonesian side, Indonesia is willing and able to reach its 2060 targets on its own without any help, but if it can also reach them earlier, so we can have an acceleration, but that depends on the support and cooperation of outside countries. So I hope Norway, which is represented today, will contribute to this. It was also mentioned that energy transition, even with an ambitious, and even if we are ambitious and actually implement things and are successful, it's still going to take time. And in the meantime, we also need to think about how to manage fossil fuels, about security of supply related to fossil fuels, and so on. It was also mentioned, so this on the one hand is a challenge, which is highlighted very much by the conflict in Ukraine, with Russia being the world's biggest energy exporter. It's going to have an impact for many years to come, this conflict. And even countries that are not so engaged will be affected because it affects the price of LNG, of oil, of coal, and of nuclear power, where Russia is the world's biggest international actor. But at the same time as these things are very real and very important right now, it is also important to think not just about what needs to be phased out, but also what needs to be phased in. Because if we are successful in phasing in clean energy and clean energy solutions, the rest will, to some extent, take care of itself. The price in many markets around the world, the price of many renewable energy technologies has fallen dramatically and is continuing to fall. Okay, I should wrap up. It was also mentioned that the power sector itself is vulnerable to climate change. And this may sound a bit technical and a bit abstract, but this is actually quite serious. If you look at the situation right now in India and Pakistan with extremely high heat and other extreme weather events around the world, these weather events, which become more likely due to climate change, threaten the stability of energy supply. So there's an adaptation challenge here. I'll just wrap up by just listing some of the things I captured as being mentioned as important. Finance, for ASEAN, for green transition and climate policy. Finance, technology, concrete projects, including carbon capture and storage, the supply of competent labor, capacity building, education, a bottom-up approach also has a role to play, and overarching a lot of this, the policy framework to facilitate increasing education capacity building and to facilitate investment, much of which will come from the private sector, is very important. Policy framework is very important. And to get this policy framework, we need political will and political leadership. And finally, it was mentioned in the discussion that there is a need to stop building new coal power plants in the ASEAN countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Indra Overland. Before we end this seminar, I would like to invite His Excellency Kjell Tormod Pettersen, the Ambassador of Norway to ASEAN, to deliver his closing remarks.
Your Excellency, Mr. Singh, Deputy Secretary General ASEAN, State Secretary, Mr. Hedvig Thune, Yudo Priodi, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Dr. Nuki Utama, Executive Director, ASEAN Center for Energy. distinguished panelists and participants. Let me start by thanking you all, ASEAN Center for Energy, for organizing this seminar, the keynote speakers, panelists, and the audience for your valuable contributions and active participation, which ensure the success of this afternoon's seminar. The objective of the seminar was to identify and improve coherence between the ASEAN countries and their energy and climate policies as a contribution to a more climate-friendly development of the energy sector and the findings of the ACCEPT project. We have listened to stimulating and integrated speeches by Deputy Secretary General Singh, State Secretary Henrik Thune, and Mr. Udo Triodi. They provided a lot of thought, food for thought for the panelists. I am also encouraged by the many participants who joined the seminar online. Thank you for your interest. It shows that the topics addressed are of real importance to many. Though the seminar has been short, it has provided us with a greater awareness of our joint and ASEAN challenges, as well as recommendations on the opportunities in the transition to a society run on renewable energy. This seminar also proves the ASEAN and Norwegian partnership or the benefits from the excellent professional cooperation between ACE and NUPIC. Many thanks to Executive Director Dr. Nuke Utama for the way you moderated and led us through the seminar. And also a big thank to Dr. Indra Overland for your difficult job to summarize the discussions and to light up the way forward. Excellent work. The objects have been met. The discussion shows that there's a lot of work ahead for all of us to chart a course to a decarbonized economy. I will conclude by expressing my satisfaction with all aspects of the seminar, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency Kjell Tormod Pettersen. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have reached the end of this seminar. Once again, on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank all speakers and participants for the extensive discussion today. I look forward to a stronger collaboration between ASEAN and Norway in the future. Thank you very much and have a great day. Excuse me, for offline participations, there will be a networking session with refreshments in the next room. Once again, for offline participations, there will be a networking session and refreshments in the next room. Thank you. Missy. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.